Usually I see the back of you.
Good morning, everyone. We have a very full day. We are hearing about 3 bills that came back from the Senate, and then we are going to vote on S56, Color High Water, and then this afternoon we're going to hear a bunch more bills that come back from the Senate, including the yield bill and the school meals bill. So to start us off, Representative Emmons, thanks for joining us to tell us about S80.
S80. So you want to go to section 5 to start with, and then that will help explain. We had an amendment from my committee. We did not physically, Representative Alice Emmons, Chair, House Corrections Institutions Committee. The committee did not formally have this bill. We did a drive-by. So we've added a new section 6A as a result of section 5. So if you go to section 5, it talks about currently there is a fee that is charged and the revenue of $275,000 goes into this fund that is used for private wastewater systems and private drinking water systems. Okay. So the language that the administration proposed was keep the 275,000 fee or transferring 275,000 from the EPA revolving loan funds. Those EPA revolving loan funds those dollars go directly back to our municipalities for wastewater systems and drinking water systems. And we in the institutions committee fund part of those revolving loan funds with capital dollars to match our federal dollars. So what the governor has proposed is moving 275,000 from that EPA, those 2 EPA revolving loan funds over into 2 other revolving loan funds that go directly to privates. The feds have allowed that to be done. So when I saw 275,000 for fees or 275,000 coming from the EPA revolving funds to the private funds, I kind of said, wait a minute, is there a connection here? Because fees haven't been raised since 2015, and then we backfilling with funds that should be going towards our municipalities.
This is a familiar story.
Yes. So as a result of that, we do have a new section 6A. And this came from my committee. It was approved by the Environmental Committee. My committee supported this amendment on a vote of 10-01. And what it does is we will allow this transfer for 1 year, for FY24. We will allow the 275 from the EPA revolving loan funds to the other revolving loan funds that can be used for privates. We're allowing that for 1 year, FY24. There's language in the appropriations bill that there's a report back from ANR about the fees and when they were last increased. And we have put language in, this is what this amendment does, is we're only doing this transfer for 1 year. And until the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources submits the comprehensive fee report that is required in the appropriations bill. And from that report, we will then know about the fee structure. And that in 6B, in January 15, 2024, the Secretary of Natural Resources would need to submit this report to my committee about the status of the EPA revolving loan fund, the big fund. So that goes a little bit different than the fees. So that's the gist of our amendment. We did also have a conversation, if we allow this, and we're allowing the 275 to be transferred to the revolving loan funds for the privates. And then we decide not to go forward and do that again in FY25. What happens to the 275 that we've already transferred if that hasn't gone out the door yet? Because some of those construction projects take time. We in the committee said, let's keep it for 1 year and let those dollars go out the door. Let's not try to claw it back. Keep it. So that's what our amendment does. But the fees triggered something in some of us.
Well, I appreciate very much the feature. Right now, I guess I could say. And I also appreciate your, I guess you could call it a 1-year monitoring to see if it goes well. Because when Adam Gresham came in here at the beginning of the session, he went through a bunch of things that I didn't know enough about. Carry forward rescission, which was basically money not spent, which should have been spent on things. And I wasn't quick enough on my feet to question him at that time, but that's basically what's going on. So I applaud your, thank you, I guess we could say, thank you.
And I want to say that I think you're right about the fees too. It's bothered me for quite a while that we are not collecting fees and instead replacing that revenue with taxes. Fees are not taxes and taxes are not fees. So if we stop collecting money from the people who directly benefit from whatever the fee is paying for, and that is the definition of a fee, and we replace that with tax money, we're on the wrong trail. That is not the way this is intended to work. So thank you. It'll put us on the right trail.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. Do you want me to stay or go?
Totally up to you.
You're doing the whole bill, right, Mike?
Let's sit for a little bit.
Chair, I guess I have the wrong.
I was wondering about that.
I think they have on, well, set it, but
It's right. I'm sorry, I didn't check the documents until too late.
thank you, Michael and Sorcia, for finding your wedding.
We are, but
It might take a moment for it to update on your page though.
But you could start with S80 has passed the Senate, which is on your website.
Okay, great.
And I don't know how much detail you want me to provide for the non-revenue generating.
we have 5 minutes for you to sit in that chair.
Okay. So, as Representative Emmons just noted, the big fee issue here relates to the transfer, authorization of a transfer from the EPA Pollution Control Revolving Fund to a state wastewater and potable water revolving loan fund. The EPA fund is capitalized largely with federal dollars that come in every year under the Clean Water Act. The Vermont Wastewater and Potable Water Revolving Loan Fund currently is capitalized by up to $275,000 in fees on potable water supply and well system. And you can see that on page 4 of the Senate passed version of S80. So what is being proposed is that from the EPA Pollution Control Fund, so from the federally capitalized fund, up to $275,000 could be, or a combination of fees and money from the EPA SRF, could be transferred into that state wastewater and potable water revolving loan fund. And that fund is used to pay for or to issue grants for replacement of failed potable water supply and wastewater systems. And you can see that program that is created. It is on page 9. So when there is that, there's already one for a failed potable water supply, and that's subdivision 4763B subsection A. And then there's going to be one for failed wastewater systems. Using those monies, either those fees or money from the EPA Pollution Control Revolving Fund. A key point, if money from the EPA Pollution Control Revolving Loan Fund is going to be used on page 9, lines 9 through 12. Your Corrections and Institutions Committee doesn't like state money to be used for private projects. So this money under federal law can be used for private projects. And so this language says if that EPA money is moved to the state fund, then no state funds are to be used for this program.
Michael, what's the high water mark in that EPA fund? How much money comes to us from the feds for the water fund?
It is a formula based generally on population. For Vermont is, I think, either 48th or 49th on the list. So we don't get a substantial amount as compared to other states, but it's substantial as compared to Vermont. There's, I think, $72 million, $77 million in the fund if you account for what's coming and going.
Okay. And then
and that's just the water fund. That's not the drinking water fund. That's drinking water is another fund.
same amount?
No, I don't know the drinking water off the top of my head.
Doesn't matter. So I can find out. But then the 275, does that have an income base, or is that open to anyone in the state who has a
No,
system?
it does have criteria. You can see those criteria on page 9. It may only be made to an owner with a household income equal to or less than 200% of the state average median household income. And the criteria go on from there.
Thank you.
Michael, I'm just trying to get the different funds straight. So there's the Vermont wastewater and potable water revolving loan fund.
Right.
And then there are 2 other revolving loan funds as well, correct? And also deal with water, wastewater, potable water and wastewater. Is that right?
There are actually 12. Over time, the body is kind of like, oh, we want to do a loan fund for this, and we create this fund. And over time, that runs out of money, but it's still there.
Okay.
The ones that are really viable are the EPA funds, the ones that receive money for clean water projects and the Clean Water Fund, and for drinking water under the Safe Drinking Water Act. But one of the most recent funds that you created, state funds, was this new fund to be used for replacement of or for assistance to people with failed wells and wastewater systems. And that's the Vermont Wastewater and Potable Water Revolving Loan Fund. It's been pretty popular and it's been used. And so the agency wants it to continue, but you have that concern that was raised by Representative Emmons of whether or not this authorized transfer really, I wouldn't say a displacement of fees, but it allows for use of those fees for agency costs when maybe the agency costs should have been covered by the appropriate inflationary increases in those fees.
Maybe.
Any other questions for me? Anything else you need to tell us? Yeah, go ahead.
She mentioned that the fees won't be collected for the year.
So the fees are collected. They haven't been addressed in a fee report since 2015. So that is the basis for the fee report requirement and the big bill that A&R and other agencies have to basically fundamentally justify the fees that they're charging right now. And then once that is submitted, then after fiscal year 2024, the transfer from the EPA to the state fund can continue, but only if the General Assembly further approves it. Because that will allow you time to see if you get that fee report and you say, oh, the fees should have been adjusted, That'll give you time to adjust the fees and then calculate whether or not you need the authority to transfer the 275.
Can I make sure I'm understanding? So we're transferring the money, we're approving the transfer as recommended and doing it for a year. Want to see if you report, see if we want, once we have more information,
Right.
if it makes sense to do this again or if it
Correct.
makes sense to do something else.
Correct.
Just to be clear, I think I understand that regardless of the content of the report, we would be at a crossroads in terms of raising or not raising the fees independently of the content that we receive from ANR.
Or we will be at a crossroads about whether or not we want to do the transfer next year, I think is.
Yep.
Michael, anything else you can tell us?
There's there's a couple of sections which switch A&R's administrative penalties from specific default amounts to the agency's overall general enforcement authority. I think Dan's fiscal note says that has de minimis effect at all on the general fund. But that's really it after that.
Dan. Would you like to join us?
Love to. Good morning.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan Dickerson with the Joint Fiscal Office. This fiscal note has four pieces. The first pertains to Section 4. This is some language pertaining to salvage yards and allowing that for a salvage yard that is being directed to close because they have not registered with the state and didn't receive authorization from ANR, they're being directed to do so. And so that would allow them to bring in a mobile salvage yard to dismantle their operations without registering with the state. And so in this case, and typically when you register a salvage yard, you pay some sort of fee that's set in statute. But because these salvage yards would not have registered, would not have paid the fee, there's not really any lost revenue by not requiring them to pay the fee for a mobile salvage yard. So that's, I think, a negligible fiscal impact. On the revolving loan fund piece, I guess there's certainly the perspective of having, being able to use the federal funds to capitalize this revolving fund. Maybe you could see it as saving the administration from having to raise fees to cover that cost. I kind of, when I thought about this late last night as I was writing the fiscal note, I see also the benefit of if you can, you have state funds, federal funds. The federal funds have a more limited sort of pathway to being deployed. But if you can, that revolving fund is relatively healthy, 70 to 80 million. So if you could take a small piece of that and save more flexible state funds for other uses, then I see a benefit there. So there are two perspectives. Yes, it probably potentially saves the administration from the pressure of the environmental permit fund underperforming based on fees not being raised. But I think there's also the benefit of you can take the federal funds and use them for this other purpose and save state funds for staffing and other things. Then it's helpful. So that and so with that said, you're saving state funds, but you're taking federal funds that would have been used for other projects previously and now using them elsewhere. And so that obviously puts, 300,000, potentially up to 300 or 275,000 of pressure on those other projects that would have previously, utilized those dollars. So that's the trade-off. And then sections, I think it was 11 through 13, as Mike noted, that just it takes away specific penalties and statute and just refers to a chapter under ANR that broadly deals with how their enforcement authority is carried out. And the practice, at least my practice within JFO, is to not sort of estimate impacts from penalties because we obviously want to. Ideally, we would never have to require penalties to be paid to the state, and everybody would do what they need to. So I try not to make a guess on that. But given that the Secretary of ANR already has some flexibility as far as what level of penalties to levy, it's hard to predict what that thought process would be. So that's sections 11, 13, and then the final section, I think is more on the spending side, but it was section 18 dealing with the petroleum cleanup fund. And it's just, essentially there, I think there's a little bit more to it, but I think the big picture is, currently there are caps on the amount of money that can go for various uses of those fund dollars. And those caps are being raised, probably to reflect inflation and the higher cost of doing those cleanup projects. So it could put a little more pressure on the fund, but once again, the Secretary of A&R has some flexibility as far as how much to actually provide to reimburse those projects.
And then just to sort of summarize and understand from our more narrow perspective on these here, we are doing the governor's recommended transfer the money and we're just asking for.
Yes, you're asking for a fee report, which will go to your committee. Corrections Institutions is asking for an assessment of the revolving fund, EPA revolving funds, and then you'll have to, make a decision on fees within your committee, but then also the legislature will have to make a decision on whether to allow that transfer process to continue.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate you mentioning that, my own words on this, like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and trying to put Peter as far down the road as we can while we pay, kind of stuff like that. I mean, as Representative Brannigan pointed out early in the section, when we started talking about fees, lack of fees means we take money from the general fund in one way or another and keep postponing what I would say is some really essential work that needs to be done, but it's lower profile sometimes. So, thank you for this.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Yeah, we do the work that the fees would have paid for, but now we pay for it with general fund money. And what the general fund money would have paid for goes wanting.
Right.
And
right.
I just think this is really wrong. But anyway,
But it's got a good hook in it.
got a good hook in it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to find S80 favorable.
Second.
Senator Devereux moved that we find SAB favorable as amended multiple times. Representative Anthony seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, this is the first I have seen this thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we ought to know before we vote, Dan?
Not that I can think of, no.
No closeted dark secrets? No.
If there is, I was not able to discover it. But I also, I worked on this pretty late last night. And so I can't say with 100% certainty that I didn't miss something, but I think I covered it.
We'll learn about it on the floor if there are.
Yes. We're really just sort of getting this narrow, drive-by. Yes.
Are we voting on the amendment or are we voting on?
We're voting on the whole thing.
As amended.
Yeah, as amended. As amended, as multiple amended, yes.
Understood.
Yes. We do have possession of it.
Okay, just.
Thank you.
You're allowed to say that, just multiple amended? You don't have to go through the as amended by the House, as amended by the.
This time of year, where we are doing.
Economy of effort is important.
Yes. Any further discussion? Wonderful. The clerk, please call the roll.
Andrews, yes. Anthony,
Yep.
Beck,
Yes.
Brannigan,
Yes.
Demeraux,
Yes.
Maslin.
Yep.
Meadows.
Yep.
Odie, Sims,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Canfield,
Yes.
Kornheiser.
Yes.
1101.
Thank you. Representative Maslin, can you report that?
I would be pleased to.
Thank you.
I'll be polite.
Okay. Next up, sports wagering. Hello, Tucker.
Hello, House Ways and Meetings, and good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. You have in front of you, I hope, the Senate's proposal of amendment for H127. Background for what happened in the Senate, 3 committee amendments and a 4th floor amendment from a de facto committee, every member of Senate Judiciary. Quick background on the non-money stuff. Some of the contract provision requirements were changed by Senate Economic Development. The uses for the money in the problem gambling program were condensed down into 3 criteria. There was an initial proposal for fees from Senate Economic Development that was replaced by a proposal from Senate Finance. The Sports Wagering Fund was renamed the Sports Wagering Enterprise Fund. The crimes and penalties provisions, the penalties were doubled and applied strictly to corporations, partnerships, and associations instead of all people who are not licensed. And DLL was given authority to get background checks on the operators.
Good call.
Pretty good call. It was assumed they already had that authority and was flagged that they didn't have the exact same authority as the Cannabis Control Board, so they made sure that the language was exactly the same. The appropriations were changed. Everything that the House passed for fiscal year 2024 stayed the same. There was an added appropriation for the Agency of Digital Services. Everything for FY25 and later was boiled down into a recommendation and report that will come in January 2024 from the Department of Liquor and Lottery in consultation with the Department of Mental Health and the Chief Prevention Officer. Which brings us to the fees. And if you have the side by side, you'll see it on page 2. The fees were in section 1320 in subsection C.
Do we have this?
We do.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Even yellow highlighting.
There's a lot of highlighting because I highlighted everything that was new and everything in this block was brand new. So everything's highlighted.
Okay.
But if you look at the top there, subsection C, the proposed fee here is that each operator is going to pay a fee of $550,000. If you remember how this passed the House, there were these staggered annualized license fees depending on the number of licensees that were going to be selected to cover the annual costs for the department. The proposal in the Senate is that there's going to be this upfront payment of all of the expected costs for each operator. The department is then going to be able to negotiate with the operators at the initial competitive bid level for the renewal term based on potentially regulatory history, monitoring and enforcement. However, the department here is restricted in that they are not allowed to apply the $550,000 fee any more frequently than every 3 years.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay.
Just charging essentially the same amount
Right up front.
right up front rather than.
And the potential that it would be negotiated for the contract term, which could be for 5, 6, 7 years, but in no event would the renewal be any more frequently than 3 years.
And sort of similarly, OPR fees aren't charged annually, they're charged every 2 years. Other questions for Tom? Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.
There you are. So many people in this room. Do you think they're all here to talk about sports betting? Wait, will you join us for a minute?
Morning. Patrick Chitterton, Joint Fiscal Office. So there's really, no major changes that were made to the structure of the market here. We still have the same revenue estimates that we had last time I was in here. First year to about $2 million because of the shortened time period. It won't be a full 12 months. And then, in second year, probably scaling up to, we have between about 4.6 and $10 million in year 2 as the market matures and you have a longer, you're not just relying on 5 or 6 months in the first year, which we are for fiscal year 24.
And will cash flow be okay with the 3-year cycle on the fees?
Yeah, so I know Charles, I think Charles is in here. They testified saying that they felt comfortable that that was sufficient to cover their operating needs. So unless he has a correction to that.
Does anyone want Charles to say that in the chair, or do we? Great, okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. And please, back and forth on this bill has gone. Yeah.
I'll move that we find the S27 as amended.
Okay, it's just a struggle, so,
Okay.
anyone want to say anything else about sports betting? Great. All those in favor, let's do a little hands up here. Concurring. Anyone not want to concur? Okay, 1101. Thank you. And we are skipping 305. We're gonna do it this afternoon. We might be late for the floor today. I think that's probably okay with everyone. Anyone like really keen on the devotional today? Okay, great. And then with that, Edie, hi. Hi. Tell us one more time about SVPs.
I would be happy to. Katie McLean, Office of Legislative Counsel. You should have it on your website. I'll pull it up on the screen too.
Is it 8.2?
It is 8.2.
I'm so Kevin.
No, that doesn't break any records for sure. So, okay. What has changed about this version is that there were some decisions made about the timing when different portions of the bill would take effect. So that is the majority of the changes in this, that we're sort of tiering when different portions of the bill take effect. Sometimes that means certain sections have to be repeated a couple times if they're amended at different times. So I'll try to walk you through the timing of those changes.
Those were all part of the budget negotiation. Conference, the committee of conference in case. That's where the magic is.
And so the new language is in blue, just to sort of differentiate it. And there are a few little wording changes here and there that I will walk you through. So no changes in our legislative intent section. In our pre-K education implementation committee, a few small changes. In subsection C, we're adding a new sentence that says the committee's analysis may yield distinct recommendations for different pre-kindergarten ages. So that that language has been in the bill on and off as it has moved through the various bodies. So now it has been added back in. And then in terms of what the committee's recommendation will consider, we're adding the minimum number of hours that shall constitute a full school day for both pre-K and kindergarten. And whether there are areas of the state where pre-K education can be more effectively and conveniently furnished.
And that was in 2 versions ago of the bill. It just
wasn't in. And so then we have some renumbering. And I don't believe there are any other changes to the pre-K sections in the bill.
Can you go back to 2A real quick, Katie? I'll find it. I know it's supposed to be better. I want to look at it. I think I have the wrong.
Could it be section 2, subsection A?
Katie?
Okay,
Yes, probably is.
let's take a look at that.
Yes, thank you. Line 10. The kindergarten program under consideration would require a school district to provide pre-kindergarten education for all children in the district in either a public school or by contract with private providers or both. That seems to me, that language seems to me to give the school district the power to say, we're only doing this and we're only offering this in a public school, and we're not going to let our kids go to private providers. Does it read that? Is that the intent or?
The concept behind it is that the district becomes responsible for pre-K education and is either offering it or contracting with a possibly private provider to offer that service. So in theory, if the school district chooses and can offer enough spaces so that all children in the district who want to participate, then possibly the private option wouldn't be an option through the school district.
So the same way kindergarten is offered at a district by a district, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
Is that what we want to give the LEA the power to cut off the private providers from the 4-year-olds?
well, so private providers could still, so again, this is a committee and a plan and not statute, right? Like not enabling statute. But 4-year-olds, even if pre-K is fully happening, are still allowed to get CCFAP
And go to a private.
and go to a private provider with
Okay,
CCFAP.
that's my understanding of the way it's gonna work. I'm not sure that this language necessarily allows that to happen.
This language is only specific to pre-K that is being governed by the school district. So there's still going to be a private provider network, and a parent ultimately would make the decision. Am I going to take advantage of a pre-K benefit that's offered through the district, either in a public school or my district might contract with a private provider? Or I am a family that is eligible for CCFAP. I have a private provider in my neighborhood who, provides pre-K services. So I'm going to make the decision to utilize the CCFAP benefit.
So this language doesn't preclude a parent saying, I'm gonna take my CCFAP money and I'm gonna go to a private provider.
Correct.
So I just want to make sure of that.
I feel like it's not satisfied that we could.
Okay.
Yeah, we have all
Okay.
spent a lot of time with this language.
So I'm going to keep moving. Moving past the pre-K language. Still in pre-K language. This is the plan to look at leadership within AOE to elevate early childhood. That hasn't changed since you've last looked at it. Then we move into the childcare and the subsidy language. So this section 3512 is amended 4 times in this version of the bill with different dates. We'll try to walk you through when each of these takes effect.
And this is all the continuity.
Yes, correct. So first we have section 5 taking effect January 1, 2024.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
And so it's not even a question, just sort of framing. So essentially what you're doing here is it's the existing language that we've looked at a bunch of times, but the dates and numbers are changing slightly so that the implementation is staggered so that it can all add up to the sum that everyone agreed it should add up to.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does that make sense to everyone?
What page are we on?
I'm on page 12.
Thank you.
So all of the language about provider rates, like the big adjustment that will happen, those dates all line up with January 1, 24. So we have a conforming change here. It says nothing in this subsection shall preclude a childcare provider from establishing tuition rates that are lower than the provider reimbursement rate in CFAP. So this is language we've looked at, but we're having it take effect with the big adjustment that will also happen. So that will be January 1, 24. Next, we have our first adjustment to the scale. So this highlighted language underlined language in subdivision A2 you've seen before. This is that the commissioner may adjust the subsidy and family contribution to account for increasing childcare costs not to exceed 1.5 times the escalator that was established. So we've seen that before. That will take effect on April 1, 24. And then we have an adjustment. So the families right now that don't have any copay under CCFAP are at 150 FPL. This would increase it to 175 FPL. And you're also making a jump as to the number of families served, or the FPL of the family served. Right now it's at 350, and on April 1st it would jump to 400 FPL. This is the first of two jumps. Next, we're looking at this section again, and we're adding subdivisions 5 and 6. So 5 is having the CCFAP application in plain language. Subdivision 6 is having a CCFAP benefit using state funds for non-citizens. And that takes effect July 1, 24. That is not a change from what has been considered so far. That has consistently been July 1, 24. And then the fourth time this section is being amended is in October 1 of 2024. And this is to do the second of the two jumps. So going from the 400 FPL and moving up to the 575 FPL. You see we're retaining all of the new language that we had looked at and we've been discussing. It's not underlined anymore because at this point it's existing law. And you'll see our 175 here. Again, not underlined because at that point it's existing law. Okay. It's legislative gymnastics. Okay, so I'm in section 5D, page 17. Because you have chosen to move to 175 FPL for families with no copay versus staying at the 150. This language about the size of the family contribution is changing. So it had been $26 for families at 151% of FPL. However, because we're now starting the scale at 176, where families begin to have a copay, we've, sort of jumped up in the scale to where the family is paying $52. And this takes effect, I want to say April 1, 24. Let me confirm. Yes, April 1, 24. Next to section 6, this is our sort of big rate adjustment for providers. So we have legislative intent language, and we've, the only change here is using the word recommended, the provider rate adjustment recommended in this section. And then our language about what the rate is in subdivision B1. So earlier versions you have seen sets the adjusted reimbursement rate at 38.5%. This sets it at 35%. This is January 1, 24. Yes, thank you. Also, the language about closing the differential between family child care and child care provider and center-based providers used to be in this section, but that language no longer has a January 1, 24 effective date. So that has been removed from this section, and you'll see it later on when we have language taking effect a bit later. Okay, section 7 is the appropriation for the fiscal year 24 pieces that we've seen. So in terms of the family expansion, going from the 350 to the 400 and jumping from the 150 for no copay to 175. Also the rate adjustment to 35%. The number for that is 47,300,000. So that is where that number is. And then we still have language in subdivision B1 about the 4 million to create 11 positions. That has not changed. 2 million of which is for the community child care support agencies. Next is the readiness payments. This takes effect July 1, 23. It takes effect right away. The idea is getting the system and providers ready for the changes that are coming and to get them through until the rate adjustments happen. So this is 20 million. Trying to remember, Human Services landed almost at 19 million, and I think the Senate was at 21. So this is sort of right in the middle of those. And I just updated the cross references. Otherwise, this should look the same. Okay. I told you yesterday when we walked through this that I was going to update this language, but this is talking about how the readiness payments will get out the door and that there is potentially a new bulletin that will slow down the process for getting those readiness payments out the door. So this language says that the division shall utilize the AOA bulletin pertaining to beneficiaries in effect as of May 1, 23. So the bulletin that's currently in effect, and that will help move the money to providers faster. And we're sort of referring to it vaguely because we don't know what number it will be when it is released. Okay. Next is payment to providers. We're amending this section twice. So the first time we're amending it is to line up with all of the rate changes to providers that's happening on January 1, 2024. I'm going to confirm that that is accurate. Yes, January 1, 2024. So the language itself has not changed. This is sort of the ongoing inflator for the provider rates every year. And we also have our enrollment versus attendance rulemaking that hasn't changed. And then we see this section again. And this time you have your sentence that that we moved out of the one-time rate adjustment. So the adjusted reimbursement rate shall be adjusted to account for the differential between child care homes and center-based child care and preschool programs by 50%. So this will be an ongoing law, that the differential will be reduced by 50%. And this takes effect, I want to say July 1. It does, July 1, 24. Okay. Next is the Child Care Quality and Capacity Incentive Grant Program. This has not changed. This should still be a July 1, 24 effective date. And then we have legislative language that, it's the intent of the General Assembly that moving forward 10 million would be appropriated for this. This takes effect on passage, so it's intent language. Child care waitlist and application fees, that takes effect on passage. The child care tuition rate language takes effect on January 1, 2024. So this takes effect when all of the rate adjustments happen. And this is the language about the provider not imposing an increase that exceeds 1.5 times the most annual increase in the NAICS index. Next, we have section.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do we know what that index was this year?
I don't. I imagine maybe Joyce could answer that. It would be Joyce. Yeah. Okay.
We have, but we did get that presentation from Joyce about all the different inflation indicators. That was my highlight of the entire year. Maybe.
Okay. Then we have our child care provider ownership disclosure. This language hasn't changed and will take effect on July 1, 23. When I say on passage, I mean July 1, 23. It's taking effect this year. Okay. The diversity, equity, and inclusion language that came over is also going to take effect July 1 of this year. The rulemaking will take effect July 1 of this year. We have the same language, not in green, sadly, I'm sorry. Report, I've just updated the heading to say report instead of report since we're deleting one of the two reports. Special accommodation grants has not changed. These pieces are taking effect July 1. The workforce supports repeal of the repeal takes effect this July 1. Same thing with the Administrative Services Organization. The technical assistance also takes effect July 1 of this year, and we have an appropriation that corresponds with the technical assistance that also takes effect July 1. And then we have our plan for the DCF looking at potential reorganization also has not changed. Yesterday, we looked at Damien's language on wages for childcare providers and how this was rewritten as an intent. I gave him some of the feedback provided by this committee, and he provided some tweaks to his language. So we have that it is the intent of the General Assembly that upon reaching the provider reimbursement rates recommended by the report produced, so this references the Act 45 report, the Brand report, that Vermont shall establish minimum wage rates for childcare providers that align with the recommendations of the AC's recommendations and the 2021 Advancing Early Childhood Education as a Profession Task Force report. The minimum wage rates shall annually increase based on the percentage increase in the average wage for the NAICS index, and the initial minimum wage rates shall be adjusted for inflation based on findings and recommendations of the report prepared pursuant to this next section.
Yeah. Can you go up a little bit more to the wage rates? I'm looking at one. Those shall establish minimum wage rates. Does that mean we're going to put that in statute, the minimum wage rates that we establish?
Potentially, that would be one way to do it. This doesn't specify it has to be in statute. You know, it could be you direct rulemaking or you.
The legislature's doing it. We're not talking about minimum wages that would go up naturally or something.
It says that Vermont, not necessarily the General Assembly, but Vermont has to take affirmative action to create a minimum wage rate for childcare providers.
All right.
Okay. Then we have the report that's referenced that by January 1 of 26, JFO is to submit to various committees an estimate on the current minimum wage levels based on Vermont and other state data regarding wage levels for early care and education providers.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No.
But going back to that question Kurt had, so if we're putting 4-year-olds in the public schools for their preschool education, for their, are those teachers on the steps, on the negotiated steps? And then does that mean that the care providers who are in private homes would also be on those steps to be equal?
I would imagine, and I'm probably not the right person to be answering this question, that teachers in a public school would be compensated with other teachers in public school.
So that's the 4-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
Their teachers are on the steps, on the, you know, how they increase with the number of years and attainment of scholastic achievement.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm asking is then, does that mean to keep everybody on the same scale? Does that mean in private homes, those workers would also be on the steps?
This doesn't specify that, and the scale that you were looking at, I believe, was independent of the school scale.
And this doesn't do either of those, either set up pre-K for 4-year-olds or set a minimum rate. It just has intent for both of those things.
Okay, I just wonder if that's where we're headed.
Yes, yeah. I don't think necessarily we are, no. That would be a whole other thing involving a unionized or private early care and education workforce, which seems very far from the reality that we're living in right now.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Anthony, do you have something? Are you good?
I just was going to say, you said it, not to go down that path at the moment.
Okay. And then we get into Abby's language. I don't know if you'd like to have us trade seats.
Do folks want to go through this again with Abby? Is that helpful? We've gone through.
There are no changes.
There are no changes at all.
Stay the same, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll scroll past it. And then there are lots of changes in our effective date section, obviously, because we have all these tiers and layers of rolling effective dates now. So you'll see lots of blue in this section. I don't know if you want to go through this, but we have the weighted long-term membership still taking effect on July 1, 26, still subject to a contingency. On January 1, 24, we have things related to rates taking effect. So that language in 3512 about the provider being able to set a lower rate than what is being reimbursed through CCFAP, the big rate adjustment, the payment to providers, and the childcare tuition rates. Those pieces all would take effect January 1. You can have rulemaking ahead of time. April 1 is the jump from 150 to 175, 350 to 400, and also the family copay of 52 starting at 176 FPL. And again, this language that if there's rulemaking needed, it can start early. July 1, 24 is the language about the non-citizen program and the CCFAP applications. We have that 50% differential for centers and homes, centers and homes. We have the childcare quality and capacity incentive program all July 1. And then again, same rulemaking language. And then in section 5, 5C, this is the jump from 400 to 575 FPL, takes effect October 1, 24. And then I just renumbered Abby's effective dates.
Any questions for me?
No, do it. I'm not entirely clear on what we're doing with the EITC.
Oh, that's
Just, don't need a whole long lecture, but just sort of briefly remind me, it'll click in when you start.
Sure. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, there are a couple of there are some technical changes that would take effect in this tax year 23. The bigger changes are splitting the percentage of the EITC based on whether the claimant has children or not. And that would take effect in tax year 24. So that was the decision to give a 55% credit. So it's based on the federal credit. It's a percentage right now of the federal credit. It would split it. So 55% of the federal credit would go to individuals who do have children. Sorry, I always getting that back. Who do have children. And those who do not have children, because they get a smaller federal credit, would get 100% of the federal credit. And then I can walk you through the more technical changes. They had to do with taxpayer ID numbers, and then a very technical change to the phase out of the credit amount, but I don't want to get
So just request from the administration.
Yes, those were sort of smaller changes.
Okay.
Right, sure.
Folks interested in hearing from Pat again? Thank you. You've done such a good job. Scott, did you want to hear from Pat? I'm going to do discussion next. We'll have discussion next, but I just want to.
Discussion then, Pat.
No, we can do Pat first and then. Okay. Does anyone want to hear from Pat?
I would.
Great. Pat, please join us.
Maybe I'm the only one.
Do it all. I need to introduce myself again.
Think so? Yeah.
Pat Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. What would you like to hear about? I did ping Joyce about that question regarding the tuition rates that were indexed to the NAICS code. In the most recent year, that was 5.5%.
Yeah, Representative.
I mean, my understanding is the draft that we just saw had some kind of final conference number negotiations. Do we have like an updated fiscal note or the 10-year, 7-year?
So Joyce and Nolan are working on that right now. So they're kind of putting some of those finishing touches on it, kind of showing how this has sort of progressed from start until now. But I don't have that material with me right now.
And most of those changes were FY24 changes, which we're sort of outside of our jurisdiction.
And it seems like we're spending less, so overall.
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd like to understand. So my understanding, tell me how wrong it is, that right now the copay for a family that's between $150 and $350 is $25. And in this bill, in this version, I guess this is the Conferee's version here, it seems like the copay for those over $150 has gone up to $26. Mike, do I have that?
I think that you'd probably be best served with Joyce
So
on questions.
graphs, though, that Joyce has showed us have been, for this bill, has been 27. So we've been looking at graphs where the copay was actually higher than the 26.
Right.
Yes.
But I think the difference is, as I understand this version, is that before the co-payment schedule started at 185 or 175, and on this one, the copay schedule starts at 150. So, which is what it starts at right now. So if you do it that way and you increase the copay from 25 to 26, it seems to me that for that family between 150 and 350, that if we were to pass this, that family is now paying.
And it's gone up to 170.
Well, above the 175.
Yeah, it's not there.
But it will increase after that 175.
So we moved the, and Joyce would be helpful in this, but we moved over the starting place of the graph to 175. And then we also, from where it was on the House version we were looking at. So it's sort of no copay for a longer period of time for
More income, yeah.
for more income, no copay for more income than the House version. And it's going from 27 with what we're looking at to 26. So it actually lowers costs for families compared to the House version we've been looking at so far.
But increases over current law
For
for 25 to 26, right?
Joyce is coming.
Joyce is coming.
And again, the line says, it used to
The
say.
income level where it kicks in is also higher.
Right, but at that same income level, it's also higher for that copay.
At one, say 180, so you.
Yeah, like say if you start just after 175, it used to be 25.
There's 26.
Now it's 26.
And I think that what
And
we're
then
leaving
compounding from
out of this conversation is that there's an assumption built into all of this from the beginning that because the payments to centers was so low under current law and the amount that a family would get in that range, sort of the after 150 range, a lot of families didn't even bother to apply because it wasn't sort of worth their while. So because the payments to centers has gone up so much under this, the families are enrolling much more often in that new bracket. But Joyce will talk us through that.
So in that sense, somebody making one kid, family of three, assuming two parents and a child, family of three, at that 175, they weren't applying for CCFAB and they make $150,000?
Let me pull it up.
Let's just wait for Joyce.
Okay, perfect.
Is there anything that anyone wants to talk about the revenue side of this, which is, let's see our committee.
That's my forte.
Okay.
You've settled on the income taxes. Right? We've settled on.
That's our position. And the corporate taxes to make sure that all that pass-through income is taxed to the businesses are paying.
Okay, what's the part about the salt?
So
It was just one short section.
yes, so essentially, we want to make sure the businesses are paying their fair share. They're doing it through pass-through income, right? That's how we've learned that most businesses are paying on their revenue, paying taxes on their revenues. And so the way we're sort of buffering low-income folks who are part of this system is through the EITC. And the way we're buffering high-income business owners on the system is through the SALT deduction. So that basically, you know, we set up this policy and then the federal government essentially gives people a tax break.
Which magically also slightly increases state revenue.
Yes, and increases state revenue for a short period of time. I wonder if it's helpful for us all to take a break while we wait for Joyce, and we all come back here. Don't leave this floor.
Okay.
Okay, no, like, there's tea down the hall, just don't go downstairs, okay?
Okay.